The NHS has been accused of ignoring the CAS review and going ahead with a trial on puberty blockers without the necessary safeguards. Gender-critical campaigners have written to Wes Streeting demanding the introduction of safeguards before proceeding. So, to discuss this issue, I'm joined now by the Director of GenSpect UK, Carrie Clark, the CEO of LGB Alliance, Kate Barker, and Stephanie Davis-Arai of Transgender Trend. Welcome, everyone. Stephanie, I'm going to start with you. I wanted to get a background to this. Now, obviously, we've had the CAS review. We've had Victoria Atkins implementing emergency measures to ban puberty blockers. We've had the NHS saying they're not going to do it anymore. But now we've had Wes Streeting from the Labour government saying they're banned indefinitely and private companies won't be able to get around a loophole and prescribe them in any case. So just give us a bit of background here.
That was the right decision. It was the only decision he could make. I mean, the National Institute of Health and Care Research has said that they're basically not safe. So we really want to know why then a clinical trial is going ahead with puberty blockers. And although clinical trials are done on children and there are always risks, in this case I think the risks are far outweigh the benefits, because I think this is a very different case to trialling medications, for example, childhood leukemia or life and death kind of situations. In the case of puberty blockers, the treatment is the harm. I think we really need to understand that the treatment causes the harm. It's not a side effect, and it's not a risk. It's actually the harm that's created by the treatment. So and the purpose of the treatment is to create that harm. So in puberty, you are developing and you're growing physically. You also have a surge of sex hormones, which helps girls to develop in a healthy way as females and boys to develop in a healthy way as males. If you stop those hormones, then the body is not going to be healthy. So the NHS is introducing ill health into a previously healthy body. And I think that is different to the other kind of studies and trials that we see.
So, Carrie, can I bring you in on this? Because obviously, as Stephanie says, well, there are some cases where trials are necessary in life-threatening situations where, we accept a degree of risk when it comes to the prescription. But we know that puberty blockers, there have been repeated studies that have shown that they are linked to testicular atrophy, a lack of brain development, poor bone density, all sorts of problems for something that should be, should it not, a therapeutic approach.
Absolutely. And what's really disappointing is that the NHS have looked at the CAS review, which found that psychological therapies are really very effective in helping people to manage gender-related distress, and chose to prioritise another study into puberty blockers, which we know are incredibly damaging, cause problems with mental health, infertility. Really dangerous. Yes,
absolutely. Now, Kate, I want to ask you about this as well, because you're from LGB Alliance. We know that between 80 and 90% of adolescents referred to the Tavistock Paediatric Gender Clinic were same-sex attracted. Yep. We know that this disproportionately affects young people who are just going to grow up to be gay. So this is really a human rights issue, isn't it?
I think unless it's unpicked, unless the doctors look at the fact that most of the children involved in this describe themselves as same-sex attracted or both sex attracted, what we're really looking at is a trial on gay teenagers, and that adds to the sort of horrible list of medical trials on homosexuals that go back absolutely decades. I mean, we all know the story of Alan Turing, but I think it's worth repeating, that in 1952, he was arrested, charged with homosexual acts, and he had a choice. So he either went to prison or was chemically castrated, and he chose to be chemically castrated. 2 years later, he came to a tragic end. And there's something rather circular about this, like horribly circular about this.
My understanding is that some of the drugs for puberty blockers are actually the same as those that are used to chemically castrate.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And we would say, gay teenagers aren't sick. They weren't sick in 1952, and they're not sick now.
Yes.
They shouldn't. The homosexuality doesn't need to be cured or fixed with any kind of drug. It doesn't need a trial to tell us that. It's an absolute fact. And our feeling is that before doctors start handing out drugs, they really need to look at their waiting room and ask themselves, why is this waiting room full of gay teenagers? You've really got to unpick that. Well, and I'm hoping the ethics committee, that might be something that they'll pick up and do something about.
So a lot of people who worked at the Tavistock, a lot of people within this have pointed that out. They have been saying that this is the case. It's obvious that this is the case.
And everybody knows this because, historically, around 85% of children would... in fact, puberty was seen as the cure for gender dysphoria in early childhood. And most of the majority, around 85%, desisted and came to terms with their natural body and grew up to be healthy gay and lesbian adults. And the other thing that we know from the study, because remember that the Tavistock has already done a study on puberty blockers, and the finding there was that 98% of children who were put onto blockers went on to cross-sex hormones. So you've got, in the past, a really, really small number of children who persisted in their gender dysphoria. Puberty was a cure for most. So we're not only giving them a drug that harms them now, we're giving them a drug that prevents the
cure.
The best outcome.
Well, but activists would say that these are reversible. Puberty blockers are reversible. We shouldn't worry about them.
There's no evidence to show that they're reversible. And also, if you're doing a trial, there are lots of things you can do before you actually test a drug on children. One of the things is animal studies, and the results... Now, those studies have lost their funding for some reason, but one of the worrying results was that brain changes from puberty blockers don't go back when the puberty blockers are stopped.
Yes.
There's other things that we should do, I think, before. There was a data linkage study that Hilary Cass set up, but the adult clinics wouldn't give her the data that we need. So we could study the children who've already gone through puberty blockers. The NHS hasn't yet given a date for their promised review on cross-sex hormones. Now, given that 98% of children go on to cross-sex hormones, it's clearly the first step in a medical pathway.
But there's a lot of resistance here, isn't there? I mean, Carrie, Wes Streeting, I think, to his credit, has made this announcement when many, many people within his own party really deeply object to it. But they're not clinicians, they're not experts, they're not people like Dr. Hilary Cass, who's done the research. So why is it that this ideology is so powerful that it will allow people to override the evidence that is being presented to them?
Well, it takes so much courage to stand up to this, especially when young people have been told that these are life-saving medications and they're very, very distressed. And we have to imagine politicians like Wes Streeting, being confronted by parents and their children who've been lied to about the effects of these drugs. So I think it does take a lot of courage to stand up and push back with the evidence. But unfortunately, I think they need to be a little bit more courageous than they've been so far.
They've also been lied to. I mean, a lot of parents have been told that your child will kill themselves.
Yeah.
And we know from the evidence that's not true.
This is just such an unacceptable lie. And again, going back to the evidence on psychological therapies, the Cass review identified 4 studies on suicidality and found that in 3 of them there were significant improvements in suicidality for children with gender-related distress who had therapy rather than having puberty blockers.
So given, Kate, that this is an ideology that won't give up without a fight, the fact that people are still having to argue the case, even though there's been a 4-year rigorous study by Dame Hilary Cass, what can we now do to get the message across that actually even the trial of itself is a problem?
Well, I'd like to echo the fact that Wes Streeting, I think, has been really brave. It's the kind of pushback that he's got from a lot of activists around this has been horrifying, particularly, going back to the suicidality, putting up tombstones outside his office, directly accusing him of being responsible for the death of children is absolutely horrifying. So I think, whilst we remain really, really concerned about this trial, we do need to allow the Ethics Committee to look at this properly and report back on it, and we need to support an ethical way forward in every instance. So I don't think it's necessarily a case of digging our heels in and saying no on any account. Evidence is a good thing. We should be led by science and evidence and not by opinions and ideology. So we're looking for this to give good outcomes for all children. And currently, all of us, I think all of us are in agreement that there are so many concerns that remain unanswered that it really feels in a very precarious place at the moment.
So, Stephanie, and finally, it is a step in the right direction, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's fantastic that Wes Streeting wants to go with the evidence rather than being swayed by activist demands.
From politicians as well.
From politicians, yeah. And that's so heartening, I think, for all of us working in this area, that we go by the evidence base. And really, I think Cass said last week that she's done her job within the remit of what she had to do. Now it's up to the NHS and it's up to stakeholders to do their job, and that includes the ethical board, who I think need to look at this issue in a wider way than perhaps a life-saving treatment, the way that you would look at a life-saving treatment.
OK, well, this is all very positive, I think, and we are moving in the right direction. Can people find more about what you're doing, Carrie?
Yeah, if people go to genspect.org/international/UK, and there you will find a full report on what we know about the puberty blocker study so far, and a template letter to write to your MP, because I think it's really important that people with concerns let their political representatives know that they're worried about this.
Fantastic. Well, Stephanie, Carrie and Kate, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.